we have to be mindful when it comes to influence, that we do not get confused about results and the things that we are doing and doing what is right. It is tempting to believe that something is good or right just because it gets results. You know, as we have our second week as life groups discussing influencer, I really want you to consider that. Just because something bears a result doesn't mean that it's always right. Actually, in Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20, we hear this: "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits." I want you to consider that for a moment. You're not going to recognize them because they're fruitless. You're going to recognize them because of the fruit that they bear. Often we want those who are not of the truth and not doing what is right to simply be able to have no influence or no impact. But that's not how the world works. There is influence and there is impact. And even if it's negative or wrong or not what it ought to be, we have to be mindful of the fact that just because something bears fruit doesn't mean it is bearing the fruit that the Lord desires. It goes on to say, are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. So here's a few questions about influence and impact and the fruit of our life. What is the fruit that's being produced? Can it honor the Lord? Does it last? Is it healthy? As we consider ourselves and as we live our lives, that God would use us in such a way that it would bear fruit in the lives of others, what we're asking God to do is, God, I want to be faithful with who I am and with what I have, that you would use me to help others do and be all that you created them to be. So if that's going to be true, here's a fact. This is not one of those places where I'm telling you, this is how you need to live things out. This is how things work. And here's the truth. We leave what we live. You will leave behind the influence that you live out. The fruit that your life bears will be the result of how you go about living your life. Now, often we wish that were different. We wish we could do things this way, but it's going to have this result. Like, I wish I could eat king cake, all king cake season, and at the same time grow abs, but that's not how it works, right? There is a fruit that is produced. So what is true of you will be true of the influence you leave. Your speech and how you speak to others will influence how others speak. Your generosity will influence how they give. Your caring and loving and consideration of others will influence how others love and care and consider others. One of our core actions as a church is to keep it real. And in talking about that, what we mean is that we want to see people live lives that are authentic and unique in Christ. And we talk about this word authentic a lot. It's one of the things that we get complimented on as a church, that it's a place where people can be real. But what does it really mean to be authentic and to be real? Authenticity is huge in being a person of real influence. It's essential. Authenticity is simply being a person who appreciates grace, who doesn't take grace for granted by living in sin, but at the same time appreciates the reality of grace in their life. It reminds me of what Paul says of himself. By the grace of God, I am what I am, because his grace towards me was not in vain. And if we want to be people of influence, man, we have to appreciate the grace of God in our life. We have to be who we are, the gifts that he's given us, the abilities that he's given us, the talents that he's given us. Man, you're good at something. That's his grace. Be gracious about it, but use it. Be faithful with it. Who you no longer are is who you no longer are appreciate the grace of God and be who He's called you to be today. But don't be afraid to share how God's changed you and how He's led you and how He's brought you from where you were. And let people have some insight into how He's leading you where you're going and how you're growing in your faith. Authenticity is not the mindset or the approach, you need to take me as I am. It is this, I am what I am by the grace of God. This means we have no need to appear to be anything to others that we aren't. We're okay being who we are in Christ and admitting where we need to grow and where we still stumble and where we still fall. So if you live by grace, you leave grace. Consider what that means in your family. Are you living in forgiveness? And are you living out forgiveness towards others? What about with your friends? Are you living in the reconciliation of Christ? And are you being an ambassador in this ministry of reconciliation? In your close connections, at your workplace, are you living out the gifts and abilities that God gave you by His grace? Are you appreciating those and letting others see the glory of God through your humility and faithfulness that honors those gifts? And in Ascension Parish and beyond, as we talk about it, man, is your first thought grace towards the world around you? Do you want grace for them, or do you just want your rules for them? Like, are we really going to live out authentic faith that others see and produce that fruit? And just in today's discussion, as you consider your mission, your here and now, here's the questions you need to ask yourself. Is there a sin you need to deal with? Are you living in authenticity right now? Or are you hiding? Is there an obedience that you've been called to, but you're avoiding or you're ignoring? And the last thought I have for you is, what reality about you do you need to fully consider the grace of God in, so that it will no longer be a hindrance in your life? Like, is there something that God's brought you through that you need to be able to say, today I am who I am because God's grace towards me was not in vain? Produce the fruit that God's called you to produce. Live the life He's called you to live, being who He's called you to be, doing what He's called you to do, and letting others see the real you. God will bear fruit through your authenticity and honesty.